Okay.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
You can't handle the truth.
Welcome, folks, to Truth versus News Incorporated here for April 15th. This is tax day, folks. Hopefully you got your taxes taken care of somehow, so the IRS will bug you. We're going to bug you, and we're not going to give you any fake news. We're not going to do that. We got the truth news here, but you get fake news all week long. But this is 2 hours solid of the best in the world that you can't get anywhere else. And I thank you people out there for giving us high praises, for saying that we're the best newscast and the highlight of your week and everything else. So share this as you like with, and we have Jim Fetcher, the most dangerous man in America, Scott Bennett, and Michael J. And they have some exciting things to say and share. And wait till you see slide 32. This is going to be an exciting day today. So take it, Jim. How about Netanyahu? What do you think about his victory?
Thanks. Yeah, this is certainly the most significant development given the enormous influence that Israel and the Zionist movement in general is able to exercise on the world by way of the United States. Or Ilhan Omar is among the very few speaking out in protest over the idea of the Congress being controlled by AIPAC. Bibi seems to have scored a huge election victory. Jews only, an open Gentile-hating policy adopted now by Israel is officially a Jewish state, has become increasingly difficult for the international Jewish lobby to explain. On the one hand, the international Jewish lobby rabidly supports Israel and has even succeeded in including criticism of Israel per se, no matter how justified, in the U.S. State Department's official definition of anti-Semitism. At the same time, however, the international Jewish lobby pushes non-racism and mass third world immigration on all white nations, policies that Israel itself firmly rejects, as demonstrated once again by the Israeli election results. This blatant Jewish hypocrisy has become standard practice within the international Jewish community, which demands one set of rules for Jews and another set of rules for non-Jews. The Israeli election has also changed the internal political dynamics of the country, representing the growing Orthodox Jewish element therein. Along with the collapse of the left-wing Labor Party, the original socialist labor Zionist movement that formed the government of Israel and used to dominate the country, the rise of the religious right's Knesset representation is a single factor that has cemented Netanyahu's victory. There are 120 seats in the Knesset, which means a party must have 61 to form a government. Because of the fractured nature of Israeli politics, no single party has ever been able to win 61 by itself. All governments have been coalitions. Netanyahu has 36 Likud members, while ultra-Orthodox parties are also tightly bound to him, giving him 15 more seats. Meanwhile, Israel launched airstrikes on Syria immediately after Netanyahu's re-election. Very disturbing. The source said the Israeli airstrikes targeted some of the military storage areas in Masyaf, which resulted in loud explosions could be heard as far east as Hama City. He added the S-300 system was not in use during the Israeli attack. I think that's going to have to change. Meanwhile, Netanyahu boasted that Trump named the Iranian Guards a terror group at his request. In a Monday tweet, Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu thanked President Trump for declaring Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, saying he had personally requested Trump's move. Netanyahu said the move would keep the world safe from Iran and would also serve the interests of Israel. saying he was glad Trump acceded to neither one of another of his important requests, which of course included declaring Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel and the Golan Heights to be a property of Israel, both of which are violations of international law. Now it appears as Scott Ritter is very solemnly observing, America has just declared war on Iran and nobody blinked. Scott Ritter says it's no longer a question of if Americans will die in a conflict with Iran, but when. The United States has long been engaged in a secret shadow war with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps dating back to the American invasion and occupation of Iran in 2003. This conflict took the lives of Iraq in 2003. This conflict took the lives of thousands of American troops and hundreds more IRGC members. The Iranian opposition to the U.S. occupation of Iraq and the inability of the U.S. to militarily defeat Iranian forces inside Iraq has led to a prolonged state of tension between the nations. Scott.
Well, of course, Netanyahu is still under investigation. The question is whether he's going to be removed, if he's going to be charged by this Department of Justice Israeli investigation or not. You're right, Jim. Trump's taking these overtures of support towards Netanyahu have, I think, enabled his re-election, although it was close, and although there are arguments he didn't gain the seats that he intended to. The bottom line is Netanyahu is a war criminal. Netanyahu has waged war and expansionist policy and an apartheid policy that has decimated the living conditions of Palestinian people, and the entire Mideast has been up in arms over it. And to see these Palestinian people living without electricity, without water, being brutalized, being shot like dogs, that makes anything of a moral character that the Israelis try and explain as a defensive posture against terrorism absolutely false. And I think the world's waking up to it. The alternative media is providing the video snippets and documentaries that capture this. I know Abby Martin was over in Israel and captured a lot, and other people have too. When I was in Iran, we had some people. One of them was the son of the Israeli general that you had talked about last week. I think it was. He was in Iran and very critical of the Israeli policy. And it's not the Jewish people necessarily. It's the political activists, the Likud party, the Netanyahu types that are putting at risk everybody who lives in Israel and who is Jewish. So he's embarking on this crusade that I think is going to end in disaster, and the United States would fall into a violent civil war, I think, at this stage in history, if Trump was foolish enough to commit U.S. troops or any military assets that were lost over there. This is just the bridge too far, the line that Americans will not cross. And Scott Ritter has it right. America declared war without saying anything on Iran by calling its Iranian Republican Guard a terrorist organization. And of course, tit for tat, the Iranians have responded by labeling U.S. Central Command in Qatar a terrorist organization. And their media is reporting not U.S. soldier deaths, but U.S. terrorist deaths in any future broadcasts. So now you're having the information clouds seeded with the rain of violence against American troops. And I think you're going to see American troops everywhere being swatted like flies, because now it's getting into the ether that they are not U.S. soldiers, they're not freedom fighters, they're not defending a democracy, they're not waving the flag for Uncle Sam. They're engaged in terrorist acts to steal mineral resources, to steal oil, natural gas, to subjugate countries into regime change. And Libya and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan were among those in the seven countries in 5 years, 5 countries in 7 years, or whatever it was. I think all of this is coming to fruition, and it will either end President Trump's presidency, because I think, again, Tulsi Gabbard is rising up and speaking the opposite. So whoever speaks the opposite of this war agenda, I think, is going to win. Or it hopefully will wake Trump up and allow him to distance himself and change policy and see that the American public want a relationship with Russia and Iran outside of the relationship with Israel. That's our constitutional priority. It's not the defense of Israel or Britain or Germany or France or any other country. It's the defense of the United States. And to do that, Trump needs to engage in dialogue with Iran and Russia and these other countries and take Israel out of it. Go ahead.
Well, you know, Michael J., before I call on you, I ought to have gone forward with these additional stories that are so directly related, and then they'll all come directly to you. Rand Paul to Pompeo, you do not have permission for war with Iran. Senator Rand Paul Wednesday warned the Trump administration not to go to war with Iran, at least without getting permission from Congress. Yes, Pompeo, if the 2001 authorization for use of military force, which allowed troops to fight entities responsible for the 9/11 attacks and associated forces, included Iran. Pompeo declined to directly answer the question, saying he'd defer to lawyers, but stated there's no doubt there's a connection between the Iranian government and Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group behind the 2001 attacks, except all that is nonsense. If we wanted to attack countries responsible for 9/11, we should be attacking Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States itself. This is embarrassingly bad. As Scott observed, Iran has responded by designating the U.S. military a terrorist organization. Previously, Iran warned that if President Trump listed Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, Iran would respond with a similar measure against U.S. CENTCOM, which has now happened and come to pass. As a retaliatory measure to the U.S. illegal decision to recognize the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, Iran declares the U.S. regime a state that supports terrorism and the CENTCOM and forces linked to it a terrorist group. I agree 100% with Iran. Meanwhile, and this is utterly fascinating and may even explain in part why the Syrian war intervened, U.S. and Israeli strategic nightmare scenario, Iraq, Syria, Iran restart their strategic cooperation agreement. The date was set for a trilateral meeting since the project was an important strategic point stopped during the war in Syria. The aim of the project to provide Iraq and Iran with access to Syrian ports. Before the outbreak of the war in 2011, Syria had completed 97% of the project, but large portions of the railway system were destroyed during the clashes, which I now say has to have been one of the reasons why the war broke out when it did. Furthermore, there's a current project to link Iran and Iraq through Basra and Syria that would also through Basra and Syria would also like to join in. Al-Watan also reported there were understandings with the Chinese side to be a partner in the project, which will be parallel to the Belt and Road Initiative, which is planned to be completed for the benefit of several countries, including Syria, Iraq, Iran, China, and Pakistan, among others. This is very significant. Separately, in a sign of normalization, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi discussed the opening of the Al-Qam border crossing with a Syrian delegation on February 7th. The Iraqi Minister of the Interior confirmed al-Abadi had given his permission to open the crossing prior to the closing due to the war, as well as the necessity for Iraq to cleanse the area of ISIS militants. Trade was realized through the Iraqi city of Al-Qam and the city of Abu Kamal on the Syrian side. Prior to the closing, annual trade turnover was estimated at $5 billion. After the war in Syria, it was still operational, but only a fraction of its activity. And when ISIS emerged, completely halted. Another significant reason. Meanwhile, Scott has gone on. Sputnik News, and I'm very delighted they're interviewing him to talk about the real purpose of the ill-conceived, it appears, Arab NATO to destabilize Iran. We're going to begin now, however, with Michael J. Michael J., we can't hear you.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting me to take a double portion. I think that it's evident that President Trump gave Netanyahu the election by his support and by his bringing him over here. I think that the election was also a dialectic that gave people in Israel the choice between truly far right, that is totally Nazified Zionist, compared to Netanyahu's, let's say, liberal or less rabid Nazism. The reality, though, is that their celebration was, of course, manifest in their committing murder and firing on a nation that has never declared war against them, but they have been involved in raising up the Al-Qaeda and ISIS and ISIL, and that is Israel with America has been the true source of terrorism in the Middle East. We're looking at the fact that people in the Middle East now understand that anything that is coming out of Israel and the United States and NATO is about organizing against Iran. And this is very similar to what happened, by the way, when they got the UN to go in with them and going after, in a police action, and going after Korea, and then later on in going after Vietnam. This is an organization that has nothing to do with declaring war. I'm grateful that Rand Paul said, no, you don't have permission. But since when have we needed permission when the people that are running the Congress and the Senate would not object to doing things that have produced genocide throughout Southeast Asia and Central America and also the Middle East? We've got a Congress and a Senate that is totally bought and paid for by the Zionist and military-industrial complex in America, with also the support, of course, of the Vatican, because the Vatican interest in the military war industries and bombers and bombs and tanks and all that, and high-level military planes like Boeing, plane manufacturing like Boeing, is very evident and has been for decades. What we're looking at is the American people are addicted to war, so that we want to have more and more multi-$100 billion industries and $100 billion aircraft carriers, while we've got tens of thousands of people, Americans, many of them veterans, on the streets in America. The kind of shame we're experiencing right now of our government is also a psychological operation, because we've become codependent. We've become a nation infected with the Stockholm syndrome. We don't feel like we have real representation of what's going on with Mr. Trump. He used to be called President Trump, but now I have to call him Mr. Trump, because he's not acting like the president he promised America he would be. He's involved in regime change. He's involved in protecting Zionism. He's involved in protecting mass murderers and the people that did 9/11 and other operations. He's involved in protecting the chemtrail programs, in protecting the forced vaccination programs. He's not stopping it. He's maintaining a right-sided political correctness, but it's still inadequate. It is still a sense of giving us a sense of inadequacy as a people. He doesn't represent us. Iran right now, as Scott pointed out, and we've pointed out in other programs, Iran is one of the most gentle nations in the Middle East. It is in some ways a kind of a mirror, in a very real sense, of what Libya was like. Iran has been targeted because they don't have a Rothschild bank. Iran has been targeted because they truly, like Syria, practice tolerance. They don't murder Christians. They don't go after Jews. They have a long-standing Jewish population there. I think it's one of the largest in the Middle East. And the reality is Iran is designated as an enemy, and their military is designated as an enemy because they actually have the ability to defend themselves. Right. So what it looks like here is that World War III seems to be in the making, in that this looks for me as something that could be actually a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. I'm not sure about that, because I don't believe that we understand who Gog and Magog was, but I certainly know that when God is talking about the true Israel in Ezekiel 38, which is filled with criticisms of the fallen Israel, because they were under judgment and going to be destroyed even more, I think the true Israel are people that actually keep the law of God, and they will be victorious against the forces of darkness. So I'm almost done. Israel, nightmare. I believe that's actually forming, Jim. I think this is what, as you inferred, this is one of the main reasons why Syria was attacked, and why Libya, that did have a really wonderful military, not aggressive, but a wonderful military until they were seduced into being disarmed, was attacked. And then leveled. Jim?
Yeah, I got to break in here right now. I see on the news that the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is on fire, and it's quite massive, breaking through the roof and everything else. So
You're kidding.
no, that's right on the news, on the picture right now, CNN, and it's really happening. So I'm not sure if that was a target, but it's heavy.
Well, that's a perfect psyop, isn't it? That's
Scott,
the
go
perfect
for it.
psyop that the Israeli Zionists and Shin Bet would do to further this Christian versus Muslim narrative, as they did in the false New Zealand shooting in Christchurch in a mosque. Now they're taking it to France and burning the Notre Dame church in a Kristallnacht sort of psyop event. I wouldn't doubt at all that the Mossad were involved with that. Jim?
God, I think you're right on top of it. I wanted to invite your elaboration on your interview with Sputnik News on the Arab NATO as an effort to try to bring the Arab nations' alignment against Iran, which appears to have fallen flat.
Yeah, I mean, this was a ridiculous notion. It's not got any story time because of its fabulous failure. But the military-industrial complex, and I think Trump is led like a bull by the snout by all of these people in every engagement, from Syria when they did the false chemical attacks and he fired 58 missiles and wasted all that money and really wasted our reputation, to this. What this event is the Washingtonians trying to form a Arab Saudi Arabia Wahhabi-led NATO organization with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Kuwait, all of the countries, essentially to form a bloc, a military cooperation against Iran. And of course, they don't say Iran, they say against terrorism. But Iran has been labeled hermeneutically as the leading sponsor of terrorism, which is propaganda. So this was an attempt to form a military bloc that can be used to stand together like a coalition of the willing against Iran. But it's failed because no country is going to commit itself to that sort of an organization, because Israel is supporting and backing it and trying to foment its formation. Egypt has already fallen out of it. Qatar and Kuwait will remain neutral. They won't be involved in it. And no one trusts Saudi Arabia because it's a bunch of Bedouin, boy-raping, women-destroying savages that no one wants a part of. Everyone is seeing Saudi Arabia as a murderer of journalists and a hijacker of Mecca and Medina. So this is yet again another foreign policy failure by the Mike Pence neocon Zionist crowd that thought they could cobble together some sort of grand military alliance and corner Iran, and it's not happened. Just like Venezuela has not happened. So these foreign policy failures are traps for Trump, and we've said it from the beginning that it's the only one who gets hit in the face with a baseball is Trump. Everybody else is sort of disappearing. Bolton and Pompeo and all these knuckleheads are in the dugout. Trump is the one who's standing up at bat, and he's looking like a clown every time one of these grand things fail. Foreign policy is going to be his undermining, his undoing, unless he stands up and leaves the world alone, stops poking the hornet's nest, and stops provoking bigger countries like Russia to come in and really help remove the U.S. from all Middle Eastern affairs. And this latest labeling of U.S. Central Command could be really the pushing of America out of the Middle East like we've never seen before. This could be a really bad Vietnam with all sorts of military casualties. Jim?
Well, I know we all stand with Iran here, united, and it's ironic that our own nation is the great terrorist nation in the world today.
How about that?
Meanwhile, we have Attorney General William Barr confirming under oath that the Obama administration used federal intelligence agencies to spy on the presidential campaign of Donald Trump in 2016. Russiagate pushing Democrats call his use of the phrase spying a conspiracy theory, as though their whole Russia hoax we've been hearing nonstop for 2 years were one of the most mammoth, all-encompassing, completely lacking in evidence or any substantiation we've ever been exposed to here in the United States. But because the Democrats were pushing it, that was okay, where when the Attorney General honestly declares that actually they were spying on the Trump administration, that's supposed to be a theory when that is a fact, and the Russia hoax was a monstrous scam. Here you have Shermer himself tweeting, AG Barr admitted he had no evidence to support his claim that spying on the Trump campaign did occur. That's ridiculous. Of course he did. That was what the whole thing was all about. All that massive surveillance was spying. Although he was supposed to testify about the DOJ's 2020 budget, Barr found himself answering questions about the report by Robert Mueller, which he said showed no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Unwilling to give up the conspiracy theory they pushed for almost 3 years, Democrats are demanding Barr release a full unredacted Mueller report. I don't trust Barr, I trust Mueller, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi told the Associated Press. He is acting as an employee of the president, said House Minority Leader Steny Hoyer. I believe the Attorney General believes he needs to protect the President of the United States. This is complete nonsense. Robert Mueller had the most aggressively pro-Democrat, anti-Trump investigation in history. Barr raised alarms among the Democrats when he told the Senate Appropriations Committee he believed spying, which he later rephrased as inappropriate surveillance, which could very well be taken to be the definition, the meaning of spying, into the Trump campaign did take place, and that he intends to investigate it fully, which is a good thing. Earlier in the day, President Trump had described the Mueller investigation and its FBI predecessor as an attempted coup, saying it was based on the uncorroborated Steele dossier produced by a former British spy for a U.S.-based opposition firm on contract to the Hillary Clinton campaign, where Christopher Steele himself testified in court that he had written it as an employee of Hillary Clinton. So we have the Russia hoax coming apart at the seams. I recommend anyone who has missed the memo, check it out. Here I go through the whole thing from beginning to end. You can find it on BitChute or 153news.net. Scott.
Well, to see the Democrats like Schumer fall into an emotional, schizophrenic, losing their mind, epileptic fit is quite gratifying, of course. But they know their voters. They know the Democrats of today are these lunatic, purple-haired, multiple-piercing, tattooed-faced, crazy people who are so angry at themselves, their God, their family, that they're willing to believe the most black, blatant, deathly lie. And that's what Schumer speaks. All of these Democrats are speaking absolute hypocrisy, absolute lies, and it's awe-inspiring to see their lack of shame. But that's what the country's become, Jim. We've reflected on this many times. We've injected the poison of this in order to inoculate ourselves from having a heart attack from it. So we've been gradually really facing the music that this country is in an emotional mental breakdown. You've got half of the country becoming goats and the other half sheep. And we're standing up calling people out to righteousness and truth and honor and constitutional principles of a republic, while Schumer and these other lunatics have been screaming lies to gain power. And they've been backed by people like Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews and all of these idiots who
Blazer and Anderson Cooper and a host of others, Lawrence O'Donnell.
And it's like they're just spouting lies, and all the people who want lies, they want death, they want violence, they want blood, are like cheerleaders. They're like crowds at a blood and circus Roman gladiatorial arena, but there's nothing there. And the country is center right. And the majority of this country are waking up and siding with Trump and siding with conservatives and siding against the Democrats and the media. That's going to be reflected in the 2020 elections, which is Trump's to lose, by the way. All he needs to sit back and put it on autopilot, and he'll win the elections. But if he keeps up the meddling, and this WikiLeaks thing is a very big minefield for him potentially. He's stepping in all sorts of problems. As Tucker said, maybe he wants to. Maybe he really wants to lose, and he's doing all the things to lose, which I don't think he'd escape with his life if he lost the presidency out of a sense of betrayal. But I'm hoping he wants to win. But you know, this whole thing that Barr is going to reveal, Jim, it's like 1,000 seashells laying on the sand, and Barr is going to go over each one and turn it over and determine if the legal and constitutional processes were followed, and if they were not, then they are ready for prosecution. That's how government, that's how law works. If things are done improperly, if things are done out of obstruction of justice, if things are done out of abuse of government process, abuse of government authority, then those government actors and agencies are punished according to law. So that's what Barr is going to be revealing. And as we've known, and as Jarrett on Fox News has said, the attorney, and as John Solomon and Sarah Carter and everyone, including the Congressman Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and all of these people who have commented on this, they see inevitably all of this coming down like an avalanche and burying the Democrats under the weight of their own coup d'etat. They invented this entire spying operation. They invented the Russia hoax. They invented it with Vault 7. They invented it with the CIA systems and technology that makes it look like other countries have the fingerprints on the hacking. Bill Binney and Thomas Drake and Ray McGovern have already testified that the computer download speed is impossible to do it over the internet. You have to do it with a zip drive and upload it directly. That shows another shell that the DNC servers were never examined by the FBI, and that was a major crime, because that could have been a foreign intelligence asset penetrating our country. That's like Japan or Germany in World War II penetrating our innermost radio centers in America. Of course, the entire military and law enforcement apparatus would have come down on the DNC servers. They would have put yellow tape around them and said off limits. Politics is suspended. Everything's suspended until we determine if this was a foreign agency stealing the Podesta emails, which suggested pedophilia, and the Hillary Clinton emails, which I know personally reflect 19,000 bank accounts that were stolen, that were used for black operations in a racketeering operation with Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and the Department of Justice and Robert Wolf, Chairman of the Americas, Barack Obama, Loretta Lynch, Tim Geithner, Brad Birkenfeld, Union Bank of Switzerland, Edward Snowden. All of that was in Shell Game. All of that was the first pay-to-play operation that Hillary Clinton did in 2009. And all of that is included in the multiple harpoons that are stabbing into the white whale of this Democrat Leviathan that I think is on its final death legs. Jim?
Michael J.
Wow. How do you follow that? Do
Yeah,
you see
that's
the
great.
enormous effectiveness of the high-speed RAM in Scott Bennett's intellect? It's kind of an amazing thing. You know, just listen to that program, just fire for effect.
Amen.
Anyway, thank you, Scott. The thing is that I am taking a different perspective, because it's really important for me to acknowledge that all of this theater for the past 2.5 years remains theater, because we don't see people in jail. We don't see people that should have been in jail right after Trump got in office as, let's just call them persons of interest, okay? The reality is we see that this man, Mueller, was allowed to do this. Yes, there was a PSYOP going on. Yes, there was a Q phenomena happening with respect to things being uncovered. Yes, we want to bring the American people up to speed. But the American people were already accustomed to seeing real criminals put in prison. Okay, that poor sailor that took a picture inside of that submarine didn't have any problem being whisked away with military justice, and the kinds of treason that resulted that Hillary Clinton did, that resulted in mass murder in the Middle East, in abandoning the people in Benghazi, in allowing Chinese CIA assets to be slaughtered. All these things are evident. They're out there in the public narrative. And do you see anybody mentioning the cover-up of 9/11 that Mueller was a part of? So the reality for me is this is theater right now. Watching these sociopaths like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, watching these people speak their lines of ridiculous, senseless
arrogant abuse of the truth is for me, it's an exercise that causes nausea. What we're looking at, though, is what we're wanting President Trump to do is arrest the people that have already been identified as criminals. There's this thing about going after President Trump or his tax forms or whatever. There's no evidence of any crime there at all. They're looking for a crime. They have been for 2.5 years. But we've got plenty of evidence of Russian collusion with the Democrat Party and Obama administration in selling 20% of American uranium. That's called treason, people. Why are we tolerating President Trump remaining in low gear, going up a hill at 2 miles an hour when he could, with the force of the American people behind him, he could race over the hill so fast we'd go off the other end. And we'd be in the air, airborne, with the joy of understanding, the exhilaration of understanding that we've got somebody who really wants justice for Americans because they committed treason and mass murder on 9/11. These people need to be in prison. Why is Dick Cheney part of Genie Energy over there and being given the Golan Heights? This is treason, Mr. Trump. This is treason, Mr. Trump.
Yep.
And I believe that the way you treat Julian Assange is going to be, for you, the end. If you betray America by betraying Julian Assange, we're going to see your mask is coming on, and we're going to see the puppet strings that have you dangling in the air because you're not serving the American people.
Yeah,
you've got another agenda going.
Oh,
Jim.
wow. Say it.
And mentioning Julian Assange, what could be more appropriate? Here we have many outlets reporting he's facing expulsion from the embassy. Of course, it has taken place now. A high-level source has told WikiLeaks Julian Assange would be expelled within days. He's been hauled out. He was purported by the Democrats as the key to Russia collusion, but everyone knows that tale. That assertion cannot stick. He never worked for any government, never published or released any information not verified. No one has ever contradicted any release coming from WikiLeaks. For many Americans, he may be the key to the murder of Seth Rich, and for the U.S. to finally determine who gave them the treasure trove of emails that showcase and expose many ugly faces of power players involved in U.S. politics, including especially Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Hugh Abbott, Anthony Weiner, and a host of others. Clinton emails and Podesta emails clearly demonstrate collusion of the President administration and the Clinton campaign to control narratives, gross reference to parties with children for entertainment, manhandling of classified information, and discussion of insurance policies. Here we have the report. Julian Assange has been arrested in London. In an indictment unsealed hours later, he was accused of conspiring in 2010 with Chelsea Manning, a U.S. Army intelligence analyst, then known as Bradley Manning, and other conspirators to publish secret military and diplomatic documents that Manning had collected. This was a very narrowly drawn indictment against Julian Assange, just as Lenny Posner is a very narrowly drawn complaint against me for declaring the death certificate he shared with Kelly Watt as a fabrication. It's a fabrication. I have no doubt that Julian Assange has acted with immense integrity. Meanwhile, we have the ongoing hassling of Donald Trump when he joked during the campaign about loving WikiLeaks and asking Russia if they had those missing 30,000 emails. What could be more juvenile and immature than to make an issue out of what was an obvious joke at the time? It was deliberate political humor. I thought was very apropos. And the Democrats are, of course, just displaying their own childishness and willingness to try to twist any turn of phrase to their political advantage. So what's next for Julian Assange? Insight from a former political prisoner, our very own Scott Bennett. Scott.
Yep.
Well, Jim, I wrote a poetic musing on this whole thing, this whole Game of Thrones, and honoring the Game of Thrones that's kicked off. And I sort of just fictionally wrote up, although it's not fiction. Julian Assange loads his quiver with the dragon glass drippings of WikiLeaks revelation, and Snowden packs his sled and rides down from the north with the Vault 7 secrets and systems and plans and maps.
I liked it, Scott. I liked it.
Brad Birkenfeld uncovers the red glistening keys of the secret banks and their subterranean mountains of gold, and sails from the Mediterranean to the marble stone court. And Bennett unsheathed the sword to disembowel the air with its blinding secrets and bring hope to the hopeless and truth to condemn the liars. And I think there's a lot of validity in the potential of all of us coming together in our different sectors of experiencing the deep state and whistleblowing about the deep state. And this particular episode, for those who have, an awareness of how God works, there is an incredible synchronicity that has occurred with Julian Assange and Brad Birkenfeld and Edward Snowden and myself that I think cannot but be put in front of a Senate hearing and a court of law and indict all of these people. And in the indictment comes the redemption of the truth teller and the whistleblowers. Because Julian Assange has really been the cornerstone of a lot of this, who provided Brad Birkenfeld with the WikiLeaks cables about Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State pay-to-play operations in 2009. This is the very first thing that she did, was conspire with Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Loretta Lynch and Tim Geithner, as well as the Swiss government, to transfer Chinese Uyghur terrorists out of Guantanamo and send them to Switzerland in exchange for confiscating 19,000 bank accounts, only investigating 4,000 and letting the 15 other thousand disappear into the clutches of CIA and the Clinton machine. All of that is requiring a federal investigation, a Senate hearing, and of course a House hearing. And in the House failure to do so, they should be removed, all the members who refuse to have it, because this is a crime against Americans. I agree with Michael J. How Trump responds to this is going to determine his political life, because there are a vast majority of people on this planet that support WikiLeaks, not because of helicopters shooting up Iraqis and that in war. Nobody cares about that. That's war. But what they do care about is what is done by people in government, at government desks, at the NSA and the CIA, in the name of America, in the name of the Constitution, that harms America, harms the Constitution, and harms the people, as Thomas Drake and Bill Binney have all expounded upon, with a lot of these illegal, unconstitutional surveillance systems. And Snowden, of course, left the country when he worked at the Hawaiian Booz Allen Hamilton cyber operations. And I won't go into how much I knew and who I knew, but there are some interesting things coming up. But the whole case against Julian Assange is an opportunity for Julian Assange to come to the United States Senate, testify. They've only charged him with conspiring to break into a federal computer, which there is no conspiracy. He can say, I simply talked to a guy who called me and said he wanted to send me some stuff, and I encouraged him to, in the name of truth. That's what the constitutional right is all about. So Julian Assange wasn't tinkering and trying to get the pair of pliers to hack into any computers. So this is, in a sense, a great way to charge him and give him nothing, because he can come and honor the letter that was sent to him by the Senate. He can appear before the Senate and say, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you the whole truth. Let me tell you how Russia had nothing to do with any of this election hoax hacking. And in the name of Seth Rich, whose blood cries out from the ground, I'm going to tell you that he was the one, and it's his family who were dishonored by his murder and assassination by people who were trying to cover it up. And I will only say that because Seth Rich would want me to say that. He did not want to die, and now he's dead, and I'm making it known to redeem him, and I'm putting it on the record right now. And Julian needs to have no fear for his own life, because this is a war, and in a war, you have to be ready to run and attack the machine guns. This is Julian's chance to run and attack the machine guns. This is a chance for Trump to stay in the background, of course, because he can't give the Democrats smoke grenades to throw and say, now the new hoax is really Trump and Assange. No, let Barr, let the Department of Justice, let the Senate bring him over on a Learjet plane with pina coladas and a relaxing music, and give him silk slippers or whatever he needs, and bring him in to testify about the monstrous truth and ugliness that was done by the Obama administration, the fake hoax of Russia, and all of the secret operations that were unconstitutional, from the Victoria Nuland, Barack Obama coup d'etat in Ukraine, to Libya, to Syria, to Uranium One, to Shell Game, to all of the crimes that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and the rest of these dwarfs were doing in the name of America, and let it be the Great French Revolution, only cloaked in the red, white, and blue. Jim?
Michael.
Real quickly, this coincidence that things are collapsing and the fake news is being exposed, and Scott Bennett's great book here, it's just really something. And I will say coincidence is that the spire at the Notre Dame Cathedral has fallen down now here at 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday. So it looks like things are collapsing all over the place. So looks like interesting times. Lead on, Jim and Michael J.
Michael J. You're muted, Michael J.
Thank you. I want to drop back and talk about something that's already been mentioned, and that is there a fallback position where it will be desirable for the people running the show behind the scenes for Mr. Trump not to win in 2020? We've been raised up and let down again and again, and this is a part of the cycle, it seems, of psychological warfare against the American people. What we're looking at is even Hillary Clinton understood and correctly made an assessment saying we are losing the information war. And after this, it was Israel going full tilt to assist the Google-managed Facebook, Twitter, and other kinds of search engine issues that was attempting and has greatly been censoring information in America, shutting down people's accounts in Facebook and YouTube and things like that, because the information war right now, because of things like what happens when the truth teller starts telling the truth, and when a person of conscience, that is that young military man, who was he, Scott, that gave the information to
Bradley Manning.
Bradley Manning, when he was so overwhelmed with the absolute terror and wickedness that was being accomplished against innocent people in Afghanistan and in Iraq by our war-crazy, bloodthirsty military that was given carte blanche to go in there and just get rid of the people that resist you, no matter, and don't think about the fact that 9/11 was a false flag and that's the only justification we had for being there, or that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which was a lie because he had shipped them to Syria, who afterwards shipped them to Russia. Don't think about that, because we were the ones that sold the weapons of mass destruction to Iraq. And the reality is that the American military has been used, but also they've been pushed over the edge again and again, and that's why so many of our military have come back and committed suicide. We had the insanity, we had the My Lai massacres and things like that in Vietnam because the military was abused and forced into situations where there was no clear strategy for victory, because it was, like today, it was an ongoing war, and I believe the reason they got rid of Nixon was he pulled us out of Vietnam. They wanted to be in there like in Korea forever. But the issue is the military-industrial complex has an insatiable appetite for war and genocide. And what we're looking at is the American people, here's the information warfare, the American people, because of the internet, because of YouTube, because of programs like this and others, the American people are understanding more. They are getting over their cognitive dissonance. They're being healed of their grieving, and they're rejecting the false narratives and the theater that we're seeing here. And they're looking at how Mr. Trump is going to treat Julian Assange, because there's already been a report that because he was arrested and removed, there's been a huge information dump by other people running the organization of WikiLeaks behind the scenes. So what are we going to see here? What will Mr. Trump do? Well, the issue for me is this. We've got people around him that are wanting war. We've got people organizing and going up into Europe to organize people to go to war against Iran. We've got people that are supporting Israel and making laws in our Senate that it will be illegal and jailable offense with multiple fines if you say anything and want to boycott that apartheid nation that's into white slavery, organ harvesting, genocide, and murdering the true Semitic peoples in that region, that is the Palestinians. So what are we up against? Well, President Trump will actually lose the information war in his first term, and he will be actually required to default, and they'll raise up somebody who can bring America back into the darkness. Jim?
Thank you, Michael J. Meanwhile, we have the Justice Department to examine the origins of the probe into the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. This is a very good thing. Going back to the beginning, Judicial Watch has uncovered FBI documents showing evidence of a cover-up discussions related to Hillary Clinton's private server right from the beginning. Judicial Watch announced Monday it had uncovered 422 pages of FBI documents showing evidence of discussions to cover up Hillary Clinton's private email server used with Platte River Networks. FBI notes of an interview with an unidentified Platte River Network official in February 2016, almost a year after the email network was first revealed, show Platte River gave someone access to live HRC archive mailbox at some point. The email from December 11, 2014 exists. It reads, Hillary cover-up operation work ticket archive cleanup. The interviewee said the cover-up operation email probably related to a change to 60-day mail retention policy backup, which is obviously not true. Obvious, more cover-up. The fact is that moving ahead with this is extremely important. The documents show Platte River Networks used BleachBit on Hillary Clinton's server system. Gee, I guess that was just part of standard maintenance. They were under congressional subpoena. What could be a more blatant violation of the will of Congress? That's a traitorous act in and of itself. Meanwhile, Barr, I offered to let Mueller's team review my conclusion summary memo, but they declined. They wanted to be able to bitch and moan about it, of course. I suppose it's rather intriguing, given the special counsel's office known involvement in the redaction process, that Mueller and his colleagues didn't just hand the report off to DOJ and leave for vacation, but are assisting in the document scrubbing to ensure that sensitive material isn't made public. If you need a refresher on the catalog of reductions, read Barr's second letter. In short, they're seeking to protect information they're required to protect under the law. National security secrets, material relevant to other ongoing investigation, and sealed grand jury records that could needlessly harm charged third parties. In other words, the Democrats are insisting on having unredacted records that cannot be legally released, unredacted. Given the fact the grumbling from Hazley identified Mueller investigation associates wasn't directed at Team Trump's no collusion football spiking, but rather at supposedly insufficient characterization of the seriousness of some potential obstruction evidence, the single most important question of this entire exercise can be considered settled. It's a vindication of the president, not just on the narrow issue of prosecutable conspiracy. Mueller himself wrote the probe didn't establish conspiracy or coordination between the Russians and Trump's campaign. Speaking of POTUS, has he seen the longer report yet? This is all a clear exoneration of the Donald. And Scott.
Well, I agree with you, Jim. There's nothing in the Mueller report that can possibly negatively impugn Donald Trump in any sort of official government obstruction or deception operations or abuse of power. Trump entered into the presidential race, a man of his own making, and he hired a bunch of people who were the parasitic lobbyists in Washington, and they've all been around Washington. Manafort, Stone, and all these guys, they're like the Keebler elves that just manufacture shoes for anybody that walks in. And here comes Trump, and he represented the American people something different, so they voted for him. He overthrew the apple cart. He whipped out the money changers in the temple, and they hated him and went apoplectic and homicidal over it. And he sort of kept skipping and whistling along. He didn't quite know the deep state. He didn't know the military. He didn't know the the official how government works, until it all started to be saturating into him. And so at the end of the day, the Mueller report and everything is just going to be a bunch of process crimes that prosecuted Manafort and all these other people because they threatened them with 50 years and threatened their family with 50 years because they did something on the tax form 10 years ago. And they all copped a plea for the most part. But that is not entering into an agreement with Vladimir Putin or any other nation to undermine or aim the president or do anything that is in violation of the Constitution. And that's where Fruit of the Poisonous Tree comes in. That's where Robert or Barr will be presenting this material about the deception that was done to the FISA court, and will most likely have the entire FISA court warrant removed as Fruit of the Poisonous Tree. That means everything that was attached to the FISA warrant will be removed. That means every case that was attached to the FISA warrant and the court process will be canceled, will be set back to zero, will be interpreted as Fruit of the Poisonous Tree, because that is the legal principle. If something is prosecuted falsely in violation of the Constitution, in violation of people's right to privacy, which Trump and Manafort and every American has, then the entire legal case is thrown out. That's where the Supreme Court can listen to the appeals. Even if you copped a plea, you can still go to the Supreme Court and say, newly discovered evidence indicates that everything that was used to prosecute me, that I copped a plea to, was unconstitutionally obtained. And the court has a duty to protect the constitutional integrity of process. So everything that was done to Manafort and Flynn and all of these people will be reversed if they argue this in that way in the courts. I have no doubt. And it's also going to just totally unravel the Democrats. It's going to destroy them, because the American people need to be reminded that they've been abused, they've been whipped, they've been traumatized, they've been lied to, they've been slapped in the face, they've been spat on by the people in the media, by these Rachel Maddow and Wolf Blitzer and CNN and MSNBC and Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger, who interviewed me, who played a role in this entrapment of President Trump, need to be dragged in chains in orange jumpsuits in front of the Senate, and I'll throw a few apples right in their face, but they need to give answers for their Mockingbird CIA serving their masters, because they were in charge of the stories about Christopher Steele and also Donald Trump Jr. getting WikiLeaks cables early, using Michael J. Erickson, who sounds remarkably similar to the name Michael J. Anderson, all after we've been talking with Michael Cohen and so many other members of Congress about this grand scam racketeering operation that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and these liberal Democrats were doing, thinking full well that they'd get away with it for another 8 years, and America as we knew it would cease to exist. And they didn't get away with that. Hitler didn't rise to power. They were overthrown, and this is the battle of the bulge, Jim. Either we push through and destroy them utterly, or the battle of the bulge, they push back and we lose the election, we lose Trump, we lose everything, and they continue their demonic, cannibalistic path to absolute breaking the borders, flooding the country with every bonobo who doesn't know how to read or write.
Thanks, Scott. We have to take our break. Don, you want
to take our break right now. So come on back for part 2 of Truth or News on April 15th as the cathedral in Paris collapses. Okay, you take care. Hopefully society won't